Global economic implications of the Russia-Ukraine war. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine will affect the global economy via three main channels: financial sanctions, commodities prices, and supply chain disruptions. US and European Union are imposing tough sanctions on Russia. On February 28th, the US unveiled a sanctions package targeting the Central Bank of Russia. The European Union has followed suit. These sanctions will prevent the CBR from accessing about half of $643 billion that it holds in foreign exchange reserves by blocking its ability to convert assets held in US dollars and euros into rubles. The measure also prevents Russia from tapping its emergency sovereign wealth fund, the National Wealth Fund. In addition, the US and the European Union have announced that some Russian banks will be cut off from SWIFT, the global payment system. Commodities prices will remain elevated for months. The most serious effect of the Russia-Ukraine conflict for the world economy will come in the form of higher commodities prices. Commodities prices could jump owing to three factors: concerns around supplies, the destruction of physical infrastructure, and sanctions. Oil prices will remain above $100 a barrel as long as conflict rages in Ukraine. Gas prices will rise by at least 50% this year, on top of a five-fold rise last year. Russia is also a major producer of several base metals, which are aluminium, titanium, palladium, and nickel. Prices of agricultural commodities, wheat, maize, barley, and rapeseed will soar. Taken together, Russia and Ukraine account for more than a quarter of the global wheat trade and produce 12% of calories consumed globally. Supply chains will be disrupted. Financial sanctions will have an impact on supply chains and trade, as companies will struggle to find financial channels through which to conduct trade with Russia. Disruption to supply chains will come from three sources: difficulties affecting land-based routes, restriction on air links, and the cancellation of sea freight routes from Ukraine. Land-based trade routes between Asia and Europe will be disrupted. Air ties between Russia and Europe, and in turn Asia and Europe, will be severely hampered following the decision of European Union countries to close their airspace to Russian aircraft and cargo, and Russia's reciprocal measure to close its own airspace to European planes. Sea freight routes through the Black Sea will be cancelled for several weeks following Ukraine's decision to shut down commercial shipping and Turkey's move to restrict transit through the Bosphorus. Impact of Russia-Ukraine crisis on India. As the world's third largest importer of oil, India relies on other countries for more than 80% of its crude oil requirements. The global price benchmark for crude oil, Brent, hit $105 a barrel after the event. This could push India's oil import bill, worsening its external position. Higher oil prices aggravate India's inflation, widen the current account deficit, and put pressure on the rupee. Bank of Baroda's chief economist, Madan Sabnavis, estimates that a 10% rise in oil prices would lead to an increase of 90 basis points in wholesale inflation. A 10% increase in crude oil prices will increase India's current account deficit by $15 billion or 0.4% of GDP, leading to a depreciation in the current domestic currency. It could also force RBI to reconsider its accommodative stance. With Indian companies already reeling with surging input costs, higher oil prices and in turn higher fuel costs will increase the situation across the board. Depending on the category and product type, up to 50% of an FMCG company's raw material basket can be linked to crude oil. Crude oil and its derivatives are used in making detergents, soaps, and cosmetics. Cement, paint, airline, and tire companies will also be impacted. Both Russia and Ukraine are not major trading partners of India, but certain sectors and commodities could feel the heat. The two-way trade between India and Ukraine was $3.1 billion in 2021. India's export to Ukraine stood at $510 million, with pharma product making up 32% of it. Other exports include telecom instruments, iron and steel, agrochemicals, coffee, etc. India imported goods worth $2.6 billion from Ukraine last year, $1.85 billion of which is vegetable oils, mainly sunflower oil. Ukraine alone accounts for 70% of India's sunflower oil imports. Any supply disruption will raise the prices of sunflower oil, as India meets over 60% of its edible oil needs through imports, and sunflower oil accounts for 14% of India's edible oil imports. Meanwhile, bilateral trade between India and Russia stood at $11.9 billion in 2021. India exported $3.3 billion worth goods, and once again pharmaceutical products were the largest export commodity at $542 million. Other top exports include electronics, iron and steel, and tea and auto components. India's imports from Russia last year were $8.6 billion. Major imports were crude oil, petroleum products, coal fertilizers, gold, precious stones, and precious metals. Russia is India's biggest arms supplier, delivering half of the total arms import.